Writer, photographer and ecologist Elaine Brooke has spent several years experimenting with new ways of adapting her lifestyle and home on the Welsh borders to reduce her carbon footprint.
When I saw news footage of people in other parts of the world being affected by climate change, resource extraction or pollution, I realised I wanted to change the way I lived so that I was no longer contributing to those problems. Scientists have pointed out that if everyone in the world lived as we do in the UK, we'd need 3 planets to provide the resources and absorb the pollution. And we haven't got 3 planets, so we need to adapt to one planet living. Once I started, I began to realise it can become really interesting and a lot of fun. Not at all the way we've been conditioned to believe it's going to be miserable and uncomfortable, and rather like living in a wet tent in a field with a bath once a year if you're lucky. I live in the country, so it's easier to grow some of my own food, but it's harder than in a city to manage without a vehicle. What you really seem to need out here is a motorised wheelbarrow. So as well as trying to reduce the number of journeys I make, I had my VW converted to run on recycled chip fat. It smells a bit like a flying chip shop, but it has a net carbon footprint of 0 as the fuel is renewable and also recycled. The majority of my water still comes from the main supply, but I try to reduce and conserve where I can. The rainwater is collected off the roof, it goes down the pipe, under the patio and into the wildlife pond. Pond snails clean up the water, which then flows out the end and waters the raspberries. Water is also collected off the woodshed roof into another pond, which was to be used for watering the garden. But the frogs moved in and I didn't like to disturb them. I'm working on a grey water system where all bath and shower water will help water the garden too. The garden is just under an acre and I'm now self-sufficient in temperate fruit and veg. I'm mostly able to feed all my guests too. All the kitchen waste lands up in the compost, of course. It's really useful to include a mix of flowers and wild areas in a garden to encourage pollinating insects and birds and hedgehogs to eat the pests. The reason the pears and herbs are grown next to the compost heaps is so that their deep roots can use the nutrients that wash down from the compost, making them into natural mineral supplements. Several people who visited me said they only had small urban gardens, and so they found the ideas hard to relate to on this scale. So I made a small urban-sized garden which produces food as well as being nice to sit and relax in. The best way to preserve any surplus is to dry food, but if that's too time-consuming, an A-rated freezer is the next best. Plus, of course, buying any extras from the local farmer's market rather than produce that's been flown in from abroad. The heating needs of the house are met with a mixture of passive solar panels and wood-burning stoves. The conservatory acts as a passive solar heater to warm the house, and it helps insulate it in the winter. Every time the sun shines, even in winter, there's no need for any heating on in the house. It's also a great place to grow tomatoes and cucumbers, and to have breakfast on sunny mornings, and this mixes the fun with the practical. The solar panels offset their installation costs quite quickly. These heat the water, which is sizzling hot every time the sun shines, even in winter. Photovoltaic panels produce electricity. These are more expensive and less productive, but they're still worth doing as installing them helps to kickstart a new industry. The wood stoves act as a backup to heat water or for the central heating on cloudy days in the winter. It burns trimmings from the garden and we're not yet self-sufficient in fuel. My biggest challenge is in finding ways to fit enough insulation into an old house that wasn't designed to accommodate it. It would be nice to think that new houses were being built with the right amount, but I'm not sure this is actually happening. The most useful thing I've learned is to make sure I continue to feel intrigued and challenged, rather than guilty, about the bits still left to sort out. And I focus on having fun and celebrating the successes, and swapping useful information with people engaged in their own One Planet Living experiment. And I hope this will also encourage you to start your own experiment to reduce your carbon footprint.